Hey, good morning. All right, if everybody is ready, we will go ahead and get our quizzes going. Put your notes away, and we are ready. Any other questions on the readings? All right, so what are some of the problems that we see in the growing cities? Yes, ma'am.
Become overpopulated too quickly. There's also, since it's become overpopulated, there's a lot of disease going around.
Okay, so overpopulation, disease, any other people have some thoughts?
Crimes,
Crime?
garbage in the streets,
I'm sorry.
garbage in the streets.
Yeah, garbage in the streets. I mean, what's wrong with little garbage, right?
The
Say it again.
The living conditions felt more like they were living.
Okay.
in cities.
So there's really small living conditions, usually overcrowded within the living conditions, right? Yeah, all of that, perfect. All right. So let's go ahead and get rolling. Between 1750 and 1900, there's a lot of changes in Europe. Now, this is an American history class, so why are we talking about Europe? Okay, because conditions over there makes people want to move over here, which changes our lives. So the Industrial Revolution in Europe changes their whole economic system. Prior to this, everybody made their own clothes, everybody made their own stuff, they made their own cloth. So it took a lot of work to keep a family together, right? Once the Industrial Revolution happens and you have these factories producing clothing and food and different things, then there's less workers needed. Make sense? The other thing that's kind of weird is during the same time, medicine develops and there's a lot more people surviving. Prior to this, you could have 15 kids and, maybe 5 of them live to be adults. So now, if your kids are all living, what does that mean about the number of people that are available to work? There's a whole lot more people available to work. So all of a sudden you have less work, more people. What does that mean for wages? Wages are going to go down, and the cost of living kind of goes down, but you guys have seen this, right? When there's more people, you need more houses, so what happens to the cost of housing? Goes up. Now you need more food because there's more people to eat, right? So what happens to the cost of food? Goes up. So the cost of living is going up while the cost of wages is going down. So do you want to live in that area? No. In addition, you start to have some wars and revolutions as people are saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not happy to live under kings. We're not happy to have a feudal system. We want to have more democratic representation. And so lives are getting harder. At the same time, people are like, wait a minute, I don't like living under this system. I want it to change. So in all this tumult, what do you think people want to do? Is there an option to move? There is at this point, because U.S. factory owners in the U.S., do we have enough people? We don't have enough people at this point. So if you don't have enough people, what do you need to do? Get more people. So they send advertisements over to Europe saying, hey, life in the U.S. is good. We have plenty of land. We're giving land away. We have plenty of jobs. We will actually come over and bring you to the U.S. and you can pay for the trip with your first month's or your first year's salary once you're in the U.S. Now, if you are in a family of 15 hanging out in England or Germany or France, and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm sure my dad is not going to be splitting this farm 15 ways. I can't get a job downtown. Does this sound like a good deal? Yeah, so lots of people come over, and so you have 27.5 million immigrants between 1865 and 1918. When these people come over, they all speak English, right? No. So what are they like? They're like wherever they came from, right? So when they come over, what do you think that they do? All right, they live with people that are similar to them. Now, if you think about it, if you come to the U.S. and you roll into New York, well, let's go ahead and talk. When you walk into this classroom, is there anything that could make you feel a little more comfortable? Like, is there anybody that you knew when you walked in? All right, so some of you guys know it's just like, suck it up, it is what it is, right? But over time, when you walk in and there's somebody that you know, what do you tend to do? Yeah, you go sit next to them, right? Unless you're like, I really don't like that person. But for the most case, you go in. So a lot of these people, they have family already in the U.S. So they're going to live near family, right? If they don't have family, they have other people who speak their language, who probably go to the same church that they went to, right? Who eat the same kinds of food that they do. So for the folks that came over here as students that came from a different country, are there things that are different in the U.S. than where you came from?
Yes.
Yeah, like what are some of them?
For starters, the electricity is constant here. The food's a lot different.
Yeah.
There's a lot less flavor.
Okay.
It's more fake. Educational system is different, and just a lot of things are different.
Okay, so food is different. The educational system's different. Anything?
The manners and like, what do you have to like if we're talking about the school system, you have to I have to talk to you as sir and with your last name and all that. You don't have to do that, at least not in Iceland.
Okay.
I can call you by David, you know? I can call you by your first name and I don't have to talk more formal to you because we're equal.
Okay.
There's no one more powerful than you are,
Okay.
except if you're the government.
Okay. So different cultural norms,
Yes.
right? Anything from you guys?
I think that in Indonesia it's just more strict with the education.
Okay. So if you had the opportunity to come to the U.S. and hang out with people who speak your language, have very similar culture than you do, and food. I mean, food's a big thing, right? I have to admit, when I went overseas, now it's super cool, to be like, hey, I want to eat this food. But I'll admit, one of the things that really kind of shocked me, when we went to Japan, I had little kids, so we were like, hey, let's go ahead and go to McDonald's because, we know what McDonald's is. No, we didn't know what McDonald's was. It was very, very different. In fact, I actually, I like the amu soba, which is, soba noodles
We have
and,
chicken in
yeah,
the McDonald's.
yeah. So even the things that you think are similar are different. So it's kind of cool for a little bit to eat something different, but over time you're like, you know what? I want to have what I used to have. And I remember when my wife, we flew back and we stopped in Hawaii. We're in Hawaii, right? So what do you do in Hawaii? My wife's first thing is like, we're going to Walmart because I haven't seen a Walmart in 3 years. Okay, right? Is Walmart her number one thing that she wants to do in life? No, but after 3 years, she's just like, this is a representation of the U.S. for me. This is something that I want to see. So a lot of these guys move into different groups that are very similar to them. Now, if you move into an Italian little section, or if you move into a German section, do you speak English? No. It's kind of fascinating. I looked into my family, and my mom, her family had, a lot of the guys came in the 1850s. Her grandmother didn't speak English. So I'm like, oh, okay. So she came over from Germany. No, I actually found out that her grandmother's family came over in 1760s. And she couldn't speak English. Why do you think she couldn't speak English?
She was in those groups that were gathered.
They move from town to town in these little German enclaves, and she never had to learn English because everybody spoke German. Everybody read German. So that's what they did. Now, you have now all of these different places around the big cities, and everybody is speaking their own languages. They have their own cultural foods. That makes it very comfortable for immigrants, but it does mean that it's a little more difficult to get out of these areas. So a lot of times, these immigrants use their last money to get to the U.S., or they owed money for coming to the U.S., right? So if you don't speak English, you don't know the culture, what are the chances that you're going to move out of this small enclave? Yeah, almost zero, right? So they are all living in these big cities. These big cities are made possible by the steel revolution. You can build these big apartments now. You can build larger cities in a smaller area. And so a lot of them live in tenements or apartments owned by the bosses of the places that they work. There's a lot of poor people, right? Does that make sense? In addition to, and just because someone's poor doesn't mean it's bad, but at this time, because you have so many people living in the same place, you don't have fresh water. Anybody care about that? Yeah. What do you use fresh water for?
Everything.
Drinking, cooking, cleaning, right? So I remember rolling into Baghdad. When we first got there was nothing working well. And so every day or every night, right before you went to bed, everybody was given a bottle of water. And you sleep with that bottle of water so that it stays warm and doesn't freeze overnight. And then in the morning, you get up, you brush your teeth, you take a shower, and you drink that water, right? And when that water's gone, you're done. So you get really judicious in your use of this water, right? These guys don't even have a bottle of water like that. So after a while, what happens? What does that do to you? Okay, so you either get dehydrated or you start drinking water that's not fresh, that's not good. And that gets into problems with your health, problems like that. The other thing is if you don't have water moving, you don't have sewage, right? Anybody have any problem with that? Yeah. All right, so I'm going to be a little gross here. When you walk on a sidewalk, and this is not as true anymore, when you walk on a sidewalk, at one point, the man always walked on the road side of the sidewalk. Does anybody know why they would do this?
To protect the other person.
To protect the other person from?
The cars and all the other things that come from cars.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to be super, super nice and you say, yeah, I'll take the hit from the car. But what happened is all night, if I need to go to the bathroom and I have 16 kids, let's just say 6 because that's probably more reasonable. I have 6 little kids and they all have to get up and go to the bathroom. Do I want to take them downstairs and try to have them pee somewhere? Or do I just say, here, you know what, I'll put a little, I don't know what it's called, a little pottery, yeah, it's a little basin, and everybody takes care of the business at night inside the room, right? What do you do in the morning? Yeah, you go ahead and you take it to the window and you throw it out. What is more likely to get hit? Someone close to the house or someone a little further away? Yeah, someone a little further away. Yeah, it is gross. And then once you have dumped this into the road, What else is in the road at these points? You have horses, right, with carriages. You have cows. You have all sorts of, if someone has farm animals, they have them out in the front. So you have a lot of waste on these roads, right? So when a wagon goes by, when a car goes by, what happens to this waste? I don't know if you guys are just not wanting to think through this because it's gross, but everybody's with me, right? As you drive by, you're throwing all the stuff up into anybody walking. That's why the guys would try to walk on the outside so it protects the person that you're walking with. So, point being made, this is pretty nasty, right? There's no birth control, right? So all the families have loads of children. Make sense? And these points, you actually are able to take care of the kids a little better. But when you have all these kids, has anybody ever had like 6 kids in a really small apartment? Okay. Is it a fun time? For the kids it is, because, you can, well, okay, not really. The other thing is most families, when they came over, because they don't have a lot of money, they would move in with relatives. So you could actually have like your mom, your dad, your uncle, your aunt, your other uncle, your other aunt, your grandmother, and your grandfather, and everybody's kids living in a 300 square foot apartment, right? Maybe you have more than one room, maybe you don't. And so everybody's just living everywhere. So when you're ready to like, here, you need to get out of here, where do the kids go play?
Outside. Inside.
In the street, right? Because that's a really good place to play, especially when we just talked about all the stuff that's in the street, right? Why don't they go to a park to play?
Because they're not many, there's just more city lines, and if they could put a building there, they'd put a building there instead of building a park.
Yeah, there's not room for parks in these cities because you just need places for people to live and places for people to work and places to people to buy things, right? So we're not worried about parks at this point. So do you think there's any problem with these kids going out and playing in the streets? All right, so once these kids go out and play in the street and one of their friends is sick, what happens?
They all get sick.
Okay, they all get sick and then they all come back into the family and spread the disease around in the apartment, right? So while it's better than some places, it's really, really not great compared to today, right? I am very, very happy I was born when I was, because I really like flush toilets. I really like running water in the house. It's amazing, what you can have. So we talked about most of this stuff. There's no refrigeration, right? How does that impact your living?
Food spoils faster.
All right, your food spoils faster. So you have to get fresh food and you have to get it in the house and you have to eat it quickly or it goes bad. That means things cost more, right? And so there's a lot of stuff going on. In addition, if you remember, in the workplace, there are sometimes really dangerous machinery. The kids are working, so the kids will be in there working as well as adults. People get hurt, right? When you get hurt, workman's comp comes in and helps out, right? Okay, you guys are killing me. Some of you are, on it. Other you like, what? All right, so do they have workman's comp? No, they don't. So what happens when your dad's arm gets ripped off? Okay, how does your family survive?
You have to force the children to start working.
Okay, your children are working, your mom's working, your uncles and aunts are all trying to put some money in. What is one other option? Crime, right? Because if I get to the place where I'm like, my family isn't eating, what am I going to do? A lot of times I'm going to say, you know what, I've got to do something. I'm going to steal something. And so in all of the other things that you're struggling with, you also have crime, right? So finally they come up with cable cars and subways. What do cable cars and subways do?
Transport you.
They transport you, and they can take people from the city to the suburbs, right? What kind of people get to move to the suburbs? People with money. If you don't have money, can you afford to get on the subway every day? No. Can you afford to buy a nice house out in the suburbs? No. So who does that leave in the cities? The very, very poor, right? All right. At the same time, people are changing mindsets. Anybody recognize who this guy is? Charles Darwin. What does Charles Darwin do?
Isn't he like the guy who like advocated for communism?
No. So Charles Darwin comes up with the origin of the species, right? And he says people were not created by God. We evolved from animals into other animals and then into humans. And so you have this consistent, people are getting better and better, right? Well, soon after that, he writes The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. In this, he takes the theories of evolution and he applies them to people. So, under these theories, he says, you're going to have people who are further along the evolutionary chain and people who are less far along the evolutionary chain. Now, when you are in America and you read these documents, who do you automatically assume has to be further along the evolutionary chain?
People with money.
People with money. Because if I have money, obviously, I have gone further along the evolutionary chain, right? And so this comes into social Darwinism, where people sit down and they say, I have to make sure that my group continues to be further along the evolutionary chain. Now, it's really amazing because you actually have people during this time who go to like genealogists to prove that their families are better families than other families. Why do you think that you would want to do that?
Gives them power.
Okay, it gives them power, and when I'm getting ready to marry my child off, then I look for someone else whose family is, of similar status on the evolutionary chain. So if you look at some of the genealogies that were produced during this time, it's amusing because they will say, yes, I can trace my family back to European royalty, back to, and if they're from, if they can trace it to England in any way, they will do that. And then they trace it from England or Germany back to King David. And then you can straight through the Bible go back to Adam. Look at me. I'm cool. I can trace my genealogy back to Adam. Now, it's really funny because I have actually looked at some of those just to be like, really, what's up with this? And you will get, John Smith. Oh, well, it must be this John Smith that came, and it's like, wait a minute. That John Smith wasn't even born for another 40 years. What are you talking about? But they did all sorts of finagling to make sure that their families looked really, really good, right? So if you want your family to look good, what's the other thing you have to do? You have to push other people down, right? So where do immigrants fall into this social Darwinism? Say it again.
The lower end of the chain.
They're in the lower end. If you came over recently, especially if you're from Southeastern Europe or somebody that commonly didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of power, obviously you are not as far along on the evolutionary standard as the wealthy people, right? Now, if I want the U.S. to be a better nation, then what do I need to do to ensure that we have more of the people that are far along the evolutionary chain and less people that are further along?
Check them to see how intelligent and how wealthy they are.
Okay, so one, I reduce the number of people who come to the U.S., right? Because you guys aren't worth coming to the U.S., we need to keep you out. Then I work on eugenics. Anybody ever heard of eugenics? What is eugenics?
It's like selective breeding. You don't let certain people have kids.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, hey, I want to have a golden retriever, so I breed certain genetics into this dog, right? And I will admit, I don't really care about dogs that, if you want to breed certain dogs and tell them, hey, this is who you're going to breed with, that's a thing, right? It's a very different thing to tell people you're not allowed to get married, you're not allowed to have kids because you're not far enough along the evolutionary chain, right? Think about the implications of that. That I will tell people, you can't have kids because you're not good enough to have kids. Now, this is also where you come up with the idea for abortion. Why would you want to have abortions?
Because you can't be responsible for someone else.
Yeah.
You either don't have the money or just don't have the majority or...
You guys got married and you shouldn't have, and you're having kids, and we don't want those kids, so here, let's kill those kids, right? And we can't do it afterwards, so we got to do it quickly. So I'm not trying to be harsh, and I know that's a big thing now, but this is actually where you go back to, let's take care of some people and let's make sure that other people don't ever get to have kids, don't have a number of kids. And so you have a couple of things where people are like, well, we need to make sure the poor are taken care of and they don't have the money for their kids. But a lot of times they will just straight out say, yeah, those people shouldn't be having kids. And a lot of times it is related to race, right? So you have this going on. Now you push back and you say, we don't want companies bringing in people who are poor, right? Because where are they fitting on this evolutionary scale? They're at the bottom, so we don't want them in this country. So they passed the Alien Contract Labor Law that says you can't bring in labor under contract. Now, this helps two people, right? It helps the poor workers because their wages will go up. It also helps the rich people who are into eugenics. And so this is where we build Ellis Island and Angel Island. Everybody's heard of Ellis Island, right? Okay, what is Ellis Island?
Where they brought the immigrants to get them checked out and to make
Yeah.
sure that they're worthy to move into the U.S.
It's interesting because it says, bring us your poor. But yeah, realistically, this is where people come and they check you out and say, do we want you here? Now, I can tell you a sad story from my family because my family did come over in the 1850s. There was a brother who got here. The dad and the mom and the other kids were back in England, Southeast England. The dad dies. and they are renters. And the younger brothers are too young to run the farm. So what happens?
They run out of money.
They run out of money. They're kicked off the farm and they run out of money. So they contact the brother in the U.S. and they go, look, you need to come back here and you need to help us because we can't survive. And the brother in the U.S. is like, no, I got a much better idea. Pack everything you have. I will help you get to the U.S. So I think there was 2 brothers and a sister and the mom all, pack their stuff up. They get on a ship. They come to the U.S. and when they get to New York, the little girl is sick. So the mom and the brothers are allowed off of the ship. The American brother goes onto the ship to take care of the daughter. Why would he be the one? Why wouldn't the mom get back on the ship?
Because if the mom gets on the ship, then she becomes sick too, and they both won't get
Yeah,
be allowed back.
because they won't allow the sister to come in America until she's not sick. So they're like, if the new immigrants get sick, they won't be allowed. The American citizen who is going out to the ship, he's already an American citizen. So if he gets sick, he's still an American citizen. He will come back. So they let him go out, take care of the girl. She winds up dying, and she is not buried in the U.S. She, we presume, got dumped at sea because they were like, no, we don't want the little sick girl here. She's not getting off the boat. And so this is, in one sense, it's a really cool opportunity for people to come, but it's a scary place. I have another guy that worked for me at one point, and we were discussing his family, and they're coming over. And he said, you think this is my last name? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, actually, my grandfather came over, and they said, what is your name? And he told them, and they wrote this down. And he was like, good, I'm not going to correct you, because if I correct you, you'll send me off. And so Ellis Island was a really scary place for a lot of people, because they were like, no, I want you to accept me. I want you to bring me in. So there's a lot of people whose names got changed, who, different things happened, because when you're rolling through Ellis Island, you're like, whatever you say, just let me in, right? So what is Angel Island?
Same thing on the west.
Yeah, same thing in California. So it is for people from Asia, for the most part, coming in. But it's the same purpose. So it helps monitor the immigration of people coming in, right? And making sure that the people that are coming in are people that the U.S. wants to come in. All right, once folks come in, let's walk through. You're living in New York, you're living in Baltimore, you're living in, big cities, right? Is national politics important to you if you don't even speak English? No. So at this point in the big cities, politics is all about local politics, right? I care way more who is mayor than I do who's president, because the president really has no impact on me. If you remember, there's no radio, there's no TV. How do you know what's happening in DC? Newspapers, which could take weeks to get to you, right? So what happens nationally is not super important. At that point, the federal government is taking 3% of the GDP, the gross domestic product. So everything is created in the nation. The federal government used about 3% of that. A couple of years ago, that was 20%, and I probably need to update it based on the spending that we've had for the last, 6 years. It's probably way over 20% now, right? So corruption is really, really bad. If you are living in these big cities and you're just looking to harvest votes, what is a good way to ensure that you get votes?
Money.
Yes. So what I do, I go up, Mr. Navid. Tell me, how many votes can you get me?
One.
Okay.
I mean, my family's.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, can you give me 50 votes? If you give me 50 votes, I will give you a job that pays $50,000 a year.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And you're like, works for me, right? All right. Kind of influential, right?
Mhm.
Can you give me 100 votes?
I can.
All right. I'll get you a job that pays $85,000 a year.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Are you qualified for that job?
No.
No. Well, you don't need qualifications if you bring me votes, right? Now, the other piece that's kind of interesting is when I go out and I make these deals with people, how do you think is the best way to get a vote? Okay, you can bribe people. My mom actually dealt with that. She was an election official, and one guy walked in and said, "Hey, how do I vote for this guy? He just gave me $10 to vote for him." And she's like, yeah, that's illegal. You can't do that. But I can offer money, but that's kind of expensive. So one of the other things they would do, and this reminds me of college campuses, they would bring out kegs of beer, right? I'll give you a beer if you vote for my candidate. Do you think that works?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so realistically, you have loads of people coming in. They don't know the issues. They don't necessarily know the candidates, but they know I'm giving you a beer if you vote for my candidate. What do you think they're going to do? They are going to vote. So you have 70 to 80% voter turnout, which is incredible, right? And so the bad part is a lot of these people don't know, don't really care what they're voting for, why. So you have a huge increase in these poor urban voters. The political bosses actually make everything work. So what I do is I come up and say, do you want to be the next mayor? If you do, then now you're going to have to give him a job that pays $85,000. You're going to have to give him a job that pays $50,000. And so all of a sudden, everything that happens in the city is based on what you can do for votes, right? Is this the best way to run a city? No. In fact, it really causes problems because you have people who are in key positions that really don't know how to do their job, or it's not their priority. So if I get somebody as a city treasurer who is corrupt, do you see any concerns with that? Yeah. I mean, when we see corruption in government now, I mean, all of your money is getting siphoned off, right? So you're like, hey, I want more money for schools. I want more money for police. I want more money for, basic hospitals and taking care of people. And they're like, oh, we don't have enough money. Well, that's because you're paying all these things that you really don't need because someone else made that happen. All right. What about if you're not in these big cities? The Republican and Democratic parties were very, very strong at this point. And so if you were in the big cities, it all depended on who the city boss was. If you're not in the big cities, then party loyalty influences everything else. So who do you think wanted the Republicans to win? What kind of people? Okay, Northerners. So especially people that had fought in the Union Army were very, very focused on Republicans, right? You also have African Americans in the South. Absolutely love the Republican Party. And in fact, in some cases, if there was only one picture on the wall, who do you think that picture was? Lincoln, right? So everybody was like, hey, Lincoln was the guy who got us out of slavery, so Lincoln is the guy. Lincoln is a Republican, so this is who we want. The other group that's kind of interesting is Protestants. A lot of Protestants are voting Republican because they supported getting rid of slavery and they start pushing Protestant values, right? On the other hand, who is voting for the Democrats? Okay, the Southerners who were wealthy, the former plantation owners, are very, very strong for the Democratic Party. The immigrants, why do you think immigrants might be focusing on the Democratic Party?
Immigrants as a whole, or like just immigrants from Europe?
Primarily immigrants from Europe, but yeah.
Because there's more democratic things in Europe than it is Republican.
They're not Protestant.
Okay, they're not Protestant. And if I'm pushing Protestant values, anybody know what a big Protestant value they were pushing at this point was? Getting rid of alcohol. If I'm an immigrant from Europe, what are the chances that I want to get rid of alcohol? Yeah, really small, right? Most of these guys coming in from Europe, any idea what religion they are? They're Christian, and they're Catholic. Now, if you're Catholic, do you have any problem with Protestants? Yes. Because the Protestants basically said that the Catholic Church was corrupt and we need to break off and start our own group. So when these Protestants are telling you what to do, you're like, wait a minute. We go to the Catholic Church. We don't want, we're not with you. And so basically you have the Solid South, the immigrants, and anybody who doesn't want the Protestant values imposed on them, right? So there are third parties. In the U.S., how many times has a third party actually won? Only when there's a party that's dying and a new party comes in, right? Other than that, we don't have third parties because it's kind of a winner-take-all. And so the two major parties will kill any third party that tries to come in. I know you guys will be absolutely shocked by this, but newspapers sided with political parties. I know, you guys are like, what? To have news people side with a political party? That never happens, right? Yeah. And they would actually bias their stories to support a political agenda. Again, I know, you guys are like, that's insane. That would never happen now, right?
Well, it's still happening in Indo.
Actually, it's happening here. I was trying to be kind of sarcastic, but yeah. And so there's a lot of politics going back and forth. So let's roll through Rutherford B. Hayes. If you remember, Rutherford B. Hayes was elected in 1876, right? Why is he elected? Primarily because he's against slavery and he was a Union general, so he's kind of a war hero. He says, I will only run one term. He said, I'm going to do everything I can as president to improve the nation, but I am only doing one term. I'm not going to stay president. I don't want this. So the South is reintegrated. The armies are removed from the South. He stops some of the most violent strikes, but he does try to help the workers. But the biggest thing he does that is important is civil service reform. Why do you think civil service reform is important? What is civil service?
Government jobs.
Government jobs. Now, remember how I told you you got a government job?
Yeah, the money.
You pay for it or you bring in votes. And as we discussed, that's a really, really bad way to get your government working, right? So Rutherford B. Hayes actually says this is not right, and then he puts an executive order out that says it's illegal to force federal employees to support a campaign. That's kind of crazy, right? Why would I have to make it a law that says you can't force federal employees to help an election campaign?
Because you can blackmail somebody.
Yeah. And that's what was happening is people would come and they'd say, hey, if you want to keep your job, I want 1,000 votes. This is no way to run a government, right? And so he's like, no, this is illegal. You can't tell someone their job depends on them getting you votes, because then they're going to spend the time getting votes, and they're going to have to be corrupt in order to accomplish what you're telling them to do. They can't do their job correctly. So he requests legislative support. He says, Congress, this is an executive order, but I want you to create a law. And the law will force people to make sure that they obey this. So, in the election of 1880, is Rutherford B. Hayes going to run again? No. He's like, I'm done. Tilden, the guy that ran against him, he says, no, I'm not going to run. So they come in and they have candidates. But the problem is, most of the candidates that people like are corrupt. And so some people like them and some people hate them. And they can't find good candidates that people know about. So finally, after numerous times, the Republicans come in and they're like, hey, we're going to go with James Garfield. You know what James Garfield's biggest positive is? Nobody knows him, so nobody has anything against him. That's the kind of candidate you want, right? The Democrats are like, all right, how do we win the campaign? How has the Republican Party won the campaign the last 2 times? Hayes and Grant. What is the thing that you see in them? They were both Union soldiers, right? So the Democrats like, hey, let's go ahead and get Winfield Scott Hancock. He is a former Union general. So he is a war hero. However, after the war, he came down and took care of Texas in Reconstruction, and he understands what the Southerners want. So they said, we'll go ahead. People will see his uniform, so all the former military guys from the North will vote for him, but all the guys in the South will vote for him because we know that he's going to side with us. The Greenback and the Prohibition Party offer candidates. Sorry, I'm not even throwing their names out because what are the chances they're getting elected? Yeah, 0. The party platforms. What is a party platform? Vote for us because this is what we stand for, right? They decide not to have party platforms. Why? Because at this point, everybody that's going to vote for you is already going to vote for you. Does that make sense? If I put out a party platform, it might tick people off and prevent them from voting. So I'm just going to say, nope, run with us because this is who we are. Garfield is elected, and he's elected by less than 10,000 voters, but it is very much, local politics and vote like you shot. So when you look at this map, when I say vote like you shot, what am I saying? Civil War, right? When you look at this, these are the guys that primarily supported the South. These guys are the ones that primarily supported the North. So the entire election kind of goes back to the Civil War, and we're in 1880 already, right? All right, so anybody know really, really, really cool thing that Garfield did? No, you don't. Why?
Because we don't know anything about them.
Yes. So he's only president for 4 months. How much, I mean, most guys get to be president for 4 years. Garfield rolls in, and there are guys who are like, you know what? You owe me because you're president. Now, Garfield was very much like Hayes, and he said, no, we are not going to give out jobs because you think you helped me. But there's a guy, Charles Guiteau, and he wrote a speech for Garfield. And that speech was actually given one time to a really small group, but he's like, that speech is what got you elected. Now, almost anybody in their right mind would be like, no, not really. But Guiteau believes that his speech got Garfield elected. So if you think that speech got Garfield elected, then what does Garfield owe you?
A job.
He owes you a job. And not just any job, he's the president, he owes you a big job. So Guiteau is like, I want to be the ambassador to France. What do you think Garfield says?
No.
He's like, get real, guy. There's no chance that I'm going to make you the ambassador to France. And so Guiteau's like, okay, you know what? You're right. I'll be the ambassador to England. What are the chances? Not going to happen. So he's like, okay, you know what? I understand. I'll be the ambassador to Switzerland. Do you see a trend developing here? Yeah, what happens? Garfield's like, dude, get away from me. I'm not giving you a job. And so Guiteau comes in and he sees Garfield, comes up to him, shoots him. Now, this is the ugly part. They're in the train station. He shoots Garfield. Everybody's like, oh man, the president just got shot. They grab Guiteau and they arrest him almost immediately. I mean, in fact, the police save him from the guys who capture him first because they're about ready to kill him without going to trial. But the president of the US is laying in this train station, right? So what do you think you need to do? Yeah, you're going to help him because there's no 911 to call yet, right? So everybody runs up and they're like, oh, look, he got shot. Now, what does your mom tell you to do before you eat food? Wash your hands. Why?
Germs.
Because you have germs in your hands. So all these people are coming up and they're poking their fingers in the gunshot wound, right? And they're like, wow, you know, can we pull the bullet out? He doesn't die from getting shot. The bullet wound gets infected from all these people sticking their grubby little fingers in the wound, and he actually dies from an infection. So once he dies, Chester Arthur is the new president. Chester Arthur was once fired by Hayes for trying to take jobs based on the votes that he can bring in. So now everything's going to switch back, right? You got a guy who wants corruption, who wants people to bring in votes, right? This is the crazy part. No. Anybody know why he doesn't want this now?
Because of what just happened.
Because he just saw a president shot over not giving a guy a job. He's like, okay, no, this, I don't want this anymore. So he's like, you know what? Let's go ahead and have civil service reform. This is the second president who has been assassinated in 16 years. No one was assassinated before Lincoln, and all of a sudden you have two presidents shot. People are like, okay, we got to stop this nonsense. And so in 1883, they passed the Pendleton Act, and it says federal jobs have to be based on competitive exams, that you will earn your position based on your ability, not on your ability to get votes. All right, so election of 1884. What happens in 1884? James G. Blaine is elected by the Republicans, and this is a bad thing. James G. Blaine is the guy that you would invite to all the fraternity parties, right? What does that mean to you?
He's not going to take it seriously.
Okay, he's fun, he's exciting, but you don't want him actually making decisions, right? So, questionable political ethics. There's some real concerns. And so, this is the third time he has been nominated for the presidency, and it should have been clear to everybody, hey, this is not the guy. The Democrats nominated a guy named Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, not going to be invited to any fraternity, right? He is that kid who studies and prepares and gets everything done and is ready for a test a week and a half ahead of time, right? But what kind of person do you want to have as president? That kind of guy, right? And in addition, while he was in New York City, he fought the corruption in New York City and tried to reduce the corruption. The other candidates, again, you have several candidates. Belva Lockwood is kind of interesting because she is the second woman to run for president. Again, are women able to vote in 1884 across the board? Not yet. So you have your second woman running for candidate to be president, and women still do not have everywhere the right to vote. So really hostile election campaign. People are calling Blaine a liar. They find some information where he proves that he just basically will say whatever it takes to get elected. And in this letter, he talks about Catholics, and he's not very nice. Who is that going to irritate? All of your immigrants. And there's a lot of them, right? All right, at the same time, in this election campaign, people go around who are against Cleveland, and they say, Ma, where's my pa? He's in the White House, ha, ha, ha. Cleveland's not married. But very likely he has a child. In fact, we know he did have a child. And I know, you guys are like, and...
Back then it wasn't accepted at all.
Yeah, back then, this is not acceptable. It's like, wait a minute, no. If you can't, do things in the appropriate manner, then you don't need to be president. However, at the end of the day, the guys in New York who can't stand all the corruption and the Irish Catholics make Cleveland the president because they refuse to support Blaine in any way. All right. The election of 1888, the Democrats renominate Cleveland. Republicans nominate a guy named Benjamin Harrison. This time, kind of interesting, there's not a lot of like, hey, let's vote for this person. It's all about what Cleveland did as president. Cleveland supported civil service reform, which ticked off all the people who don't want civil service reform. He also vetoed large pensions for all of the Civil War veterans, right? Who is that going to tick off? All the veterans, right? He calls for tariff reductions, which means the rich people are irritated with him, and he holds the gold standard, which ticks off all the poor people. So if you've ticked off all the people who want corruption, you ticked off all the veterans, you tick off all the rich people, and you tick off all the poor people, how many votes are you getting?
Not a lot.
Yeah, now you're in trouble. It's interesting, he wins the popular vote, but he loses the electoral college vote. All right, just going to whip through this real quick. We are continuing to get new states, right? And if you notice, Oklahoma is still not here. All right, the Grangers. The Grangers is a group of farmers. After the Civil War, farmers in the South especially are not doing as well as they could. So the government says, you know what, we're going to send people in to teach you how to be better farmers. And the farmers start coming to these events, and when they start coming to these events, all of a sudden they start talking to other farmers. When farmers talk to farmers, what do they talk about?
Farming.
Farming. And hey, you know what? I'm not getting as much money off my crops as I should. And one of the things they actually say is, you know what? We're getting the trains, they're charging us too much to ship our goods from place to place. They're not giving us, you know, a good way, a good price for our crops. But we try to put them in the silos. We try to put them, you know, down where people can store the grain, and they're not paying us either. And so as they start talking through this, they're like, you know what? We should set up a law that says people need to pay us what they should. And so they wind up creating a farm union so that everybody kind of works together, and they say, we're not going to sell our crops until we get the price we want. We're going to push the legislature, we're going to push people to give us the prices we need. They create a law in Illinois, and they are sued. And at the Supreme Court says, you know what? The state can regulate property if it's to support the public good. If all these farmers need to get paid more, then we can force people to pay them better for their crops. So all of a sudden you have a lot of farmers' alliances, a lot of cooperatives that bind together and push organizations to pay appropriate costs for crops and to reduce the cost to create the crops. And then they come up with political parties, and they actually create the Populist Party. 2.5 million members. Is that going to be influential? Absolutely. So in the 1890s, there's a drought, there's blizzards, and there are some other things that just devastate the farmers. But this forces them to grow closer in the political parties. So by the election of 1892, it's Harrison versus Cleveland again. But the Populist Party comes up with a guy named James Weaver. And James Weaver says, look, we want unlimited silver coins, federal railroads paid for, a progressive income tax, which means the less money you make, the less money you pay in taxes, citizen homesteads, an 8-hour workday. Both the Republican and Democrats now move away from these goals. But if you notice, what happens? What are these yellow states here?
Those are the states that Weaver won.
Okay. These are the guys that Weaver wins. Do you think this gets the Republicans and the Democrats' attention? Yeah, because they're like, wait a minute, these guys are getting votes, we don't want that, and so they start looking at stuff. This is, you know, when I talked about the Mississippi Plan, this is when they start pushing to say, we don't want the farmers, because there are black and white farmers who are getting together and saying, hey, we got to fix things. They're like, no, we're not going to have this, and they start pushing for segregation to make sure that the poor black farmers and the poor white farmers never work together. Because if they do, then it will take over and not allow the former plantation owners to be able to control politics. So this is when you start seeing this grow a lot. In 1893 to 1897, there's a huge depression. Congress has had lots and lots of money out. The Sherman Silver Purchase Act requires the government to buy $4 million worth of silver, create silver coins. Well, with so many silver coins, the value of silver goes down. So it winds up that one gold dollar is worth 16 silver dollars. Now, if that happens, the government just loses loads and loads of money, right? So it goes into a depression, and everybody struggles. So in 1896, the Democrats get William Jennings Bryan, Republicans go with William McKinley. Long story short, the wealthy people kind of control it because everybody else is struggling from this depression. McKinley wins, and he is the first person to win the popular majority vote since 1872. All right, so what are some of the problems in the growing cities? You guys talked through that, right? All right. How political bosses control the cities? Okay, money, booze. I'm going to buy votes, and then the people who I place into elected positions will give people jobs and allow them to do what they want to. Civil Service Act, how does this change the government?
Civil Service Act was so that corrupt people couldn't be in power, and so it changed government by having, they had like, I can't remember if it was like quizzes or something like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like they had to compete to do it, to get into the government instead of.
Yes. So instead of getting votes, you take a test and show that you are actually capable of doing the job. Once you prove you're capable of doing the job, then you can get the job. But it's not about voting now. It's about capability. And what's the goal of the Granger movement? Who's the Grangers? Farmers. What is their goal?
To get paid for their crops.
Okay. Yeah, better prices for their crops, better conditions to work in, right? And so how does it impact the U.S.? They actually create the Populist Party, right? Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Good for the farmers, bad for the wealthy people.
Okay, it's good for the farmers because it shows that people can influence elections, and it forces the major political parties to be like, okay, now we have to actually start listening to the people a little more and give them what they want. All right, so for next class period, this will be your readings and your questions. If you have not come up with your who you're going to write your paper on and why, what the broad focus is, please think through that, and I would like that by next class period. You can just put it on the quiz. All right?
Remind me what that is. Remind us that on that.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't remember that.
Okay, so you're going to write about someone in your family that did something. That could be serve in the military, serve in, or immigrate to the U.S., be in a union, the teacher's strike, any number of things. You're going to write the first half of the paper on that, and then the second half of the paper will say, people like my family member, people who were in the military have changed the U.S. in this way. People who were in unions have changed the U.S. in this way. Immigrants have changed the U.S. in this way. Does that make sense? All right. I will see you guys. Yes, ma'am.
What if we're not from America?
Okay, let's talk in about 25 seconds. We'll walk through that. All right? All right. So,
I think you also said that you could talk about like yourself and how
Yeah.
you've impacted, how America's impacted you and things that are different for you.
all right, I will see you guys later.